senior NFL reporter, lead content guy, Monday Morning Quarterback, covering the NFL for 2 decades. But look at this. I mean, you got a sports jacket on.
And, like, fresh off a 6-hour flight, so not bad.
No Nantucket hoodie.
No. That's how you're used to seeing me, right? Like in a T-shirt or whatever. I dressed up for you this time.
I appreciate it. So let's address a big game tomorrow.
Yep.
And there's been the Matt Stafford. By the way, they don't have any guaranteed money after next year, so they got about 2 years left of them, which I think you should just load it up and see if you can win with him. Do you buy those rumors?
Stafford, not now. Maybe after the season. The contract sets up in a way where if the sides decide it's time to move on after the year, they can do that. So I don't buy it over the next 2 weeks. Now, based on how the rest of the season goes and where the team looks like it's at and whether or not you're going to be building around your first and second year players or you're going to try to go all in again, I think some of that stuff could determine where they go at quarterback. And they do have flexibility. Like they gave him a little bump this year.
Yep.
And I think part of it was the mutual understanding, like after the year, we're going to revisit.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think it's in a bad place right now, but I certainly don't think like that there's been any hard decision made on what they're going to do in 2025.
Now, Cooper Kupp, I think a place like Pittsburgh, where if Russell's as good as he was in the second half, Jets pretty good defensive personnel, I could see them saying, can we get like a 12-target, 8-catch guy with Pickens, with our power run game? And Pittsburgh now is sitting there thinking, we may win this division. I can see Pittsburgh making a move. So these rumors on Cooper Kupp feel legit to me.
They are. And you know what it is? Like, it's funny because like teams are very sensitive to the idea that they'd be shopping anybody.
Right.
And the Rams really don't have to shop Cooper Kupp. Teams that need receivers are going to call the Rams.
Great
look
kid.
At the record.
Yeah.
His reputation, obviously, as clutch as he's been, if you want a guy for the playoffs, that's the guy. I know what they've told other teams is it's going to cost more than Devontae Adams cost. So Devontae Adams was a 3 that turns into a 2. You'd naturally think then they need at least a second-round pick.
That's pretty rich considering his health history.
And that's the thing is, like, I think a lot of people look at these trades and they see, like, the big, like, 25-year-old star getting traded for 2 first-round picks. And like, I can't believe you'd trade him for a 3 or 4, but that's the price, And the Raiders had a really hard time trying to find anything approximating a 2 for Devontae Adams. And I think it's sort of the same thing with Cooper Kupp, where the Rams, you have to look at both sides of it, right? So the Rams see it as we're trading a franchise icon, a guy who scored the winning points in the Super Bowl, a guy who was part of Sean McVay's first draft
Loved in
class.
the locker room.
Like just one of the guys that was really a part of establishing ourselves in Los Angeles. And flipping that for a 3rd or 4th round pick doesn't look great,
Right.
Whereas if you're one of the teams acquiring him, you're looking at him 31 years old, can't stay healthy, lots of mileage. This may be just a 1-year rental. Like, we'll see if we can have him beyond this year. And he's a little more limited than he was, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So I think there will be more trade talks with Cooper Kupp. My question is whether or not the value is going to match up, right? Like whether or not the way the Rams value him is going to match up with the way some other team coming in, like maybe Pittsburgh values him.
So Mike Tomlin, it's very funny. So I want to play you this, but I don't know if you've seen it. This made me laugh. So Tomlin is as good at a microphone as perhaps any coach in the history of the league.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, Gruden before him and now Tomlin. They're just good talkers. But I will say, I was wrong. Russell in that second half was excellent.
Yep.
He threw to the right guys. Tomlin was totally engaged. Were you shocked? What did you make of it? What does it mean?
I was surprised. Yeah, I mean, like based on what I'd heard and how he looked in practice and kind of where the rest of that building was, I wasn't surprised by the way he looked in the first quarter. Like
that's what I thought.
Yeah, I was like, oh, well, there it is. That's why people on the coaching staff, the locker room, that's why they wanted to keep Justin in there, and that's why, I mean, to borrow Mike's phrase, he had to go Lone Ranger on this. I also understand Mike's logic, though, and I think Mike's logic is pretty simple here. Is if you go with Justin Fields there, you cannot go back to Russell Wilson. If you go with Justin Fields there, like when he's healthy, you might not be able to keep Russell Wilson on the roster. On the other hand, if you go with Russell Wilson and you give that a swing, well, then it's very easy to go with go back to Justin Fields if that doesn't work, right? Like if Russell Wilson looks in the second and third and fourth quarters, the way he looked in the first quarter.
You gave him a shot.
You gave him a shot. It's very easy to go back to Justin Fields. So I think essentially what Mike Tomlin did was give himself 2 cracks at it. He thinks he's got a really good team and that Russell could bring something that Justin wasn't bringing to them, which was getting the ball downfield. That showed, sort of activated George Pickens a little bit. And, now we see if it's sustainable or not. I'm not convinced that this is going to look the same way over the next month with teams having tape on him and everything else and knowing what they're going to be trying to do with Russell Wilson in there at quarterback. But at least you give yourself 2 shots at getting the quarterback position right. And again, you got to give Tomlin a ton of credit because that decision was going against what a lot of people in the building thought he should do.
Okay, so I'm not insinuating what I'm about to say is the truth. What I am suggesting is it wouldn't shock me that Jerry feeds Aikman. Jerry feeds Michael and says, have at it.
Yep.
I'm not saying it happened. I am not in any way. But Michael Irvin comes out and says, this team's soft. Troy, a couple days later, said they're lazy. I'm not saying they're wrong, and I'm not saying they're fed. But the way Jerry backed Aikman, saying, boy, that's credible. I mean, that guy's a great broadcast. Yep. It's like, and then Jerry yesterday said, our play calling's been bad.
He says a lot of things. I think there's a design to a lot of the things that he does. Now, it's all over the place, but I don't think he does things without what his team needs in mind, right? Okay. I think he's felt if you look at the way he's operated since the end of last season, it's been constantly turning the heat up. The all-in comment, even though they didn't really spend in the offseason, sending Mike McCarthy into a contract year, which is very unconventional, making Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb wait until the summer to get their deals done, not paying Micah Parsons now, not making a real attempt to pay Micah Parsons now. I think he felt like I've got to turn the heat up on everyone in the organization because everybody here has gotten too comfortable. And now he sees it in the middle of the season and it still doesn't look good. So what's he going to do? He's not turning the heat down. He's turning the heat back up. And he had the thing last week on the radio, right? Where it sounds like he is, man, he's coming after people's jobs, even if it's just the radio guy, right? Man, he's coming after people's jobs and it's tense. And so, I think, again, Jerry can be all over the place, but I do think there's usually a design to the way Jerry talks, the way Jerry presents himself. And I just have noticed this pattern over the course of the last 7, 8, 9 months of Jerry turning the heat on people that work for him.
So I did this yesterday, a warm, smoking, and 4-alarm fire for our coaches. I think when you get to week 7, 8, Robert Saleh's fired, so every year one guy gets fired too early, and then about 3 weeks later, somebody else gets whacked, and then by week 15, it's all bets are off. So I for instance, I would not fire Daboll, Stefanski, or Zach Taylor. I think they're all above average. Yep. I think Stefanski's holding that thing together. It's a mess. Dennis Allen, Peterson, Nick Sirianni, I think I'd move off of, and I thought Peterson would be a hit. Mike McCarthy, with all this Jerry stuff, Troy Aikman, it's
hard to see him survive.
Yeah. But is there anything that jumps out to you about my warm, smoking, 4-alarm fire coaching hot?
Yeah, I would take Zach Taylor off of that.
So you don't think he's going to get it?
I don't think so. I know the MO of that franchise.
They don't like paying coaches who aren't there.
They don't like paying coaches who aren't there. They also have been very, very patient. Marvin Lewis was there for 16 years. He basically got 2 runs. With 2 different quarterbacks.
I like Zach.
The Browns are very into the model they have right now. And I think that's the important piece to remember with Cleveland is it's not just Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, or Paul DePodesta. It's the way that it's set up. They really like the way that it's set up. Ownership wanted an analytics-heavy model. All those guys buy into it. And I think you can look at it and say, if they had stuck with Baker Mayfield or they had gotten another competent quarterback, they'd be fine now.
Yeah.
And I think last year proves it, right?
Yeah.
Daboll is an interesting one because the Maras didn't want to fire Joe Judge in 2021. And then that press conference happened. And the heat of being in New York got to Joe Judge a little bit, and then they couldn't bring him back. So, I think Daboll, I think the Giants really like some of the things that Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have done and would like to give him the chance to go get a quarterback. But there's no telling how he's going to handle the next 3 months. And when the heat turns up in New York, if the record gets worse,
it will.
Again, I think they want to stick it out. Andrew Thomas is a massive loss. That might be one of the biggest losses in the NFL this year.
Oh, no. Malik Neighbors, they're functional.
Yeah.
They're not a functional offense without Thomas.
Right. And so I don't know what the path is out for them. I think how Brian Daboll handles it, how he engages his locker room determines if he stays. But I think they want to keep him. So I think those 3 names at the bottom of the list are in the right places because those teams very much want to keep those guys in place.
Let me throw this out at you.
Yeah.
Dan Campbell and Sirianni, basically Philly was a better job than Detroit.
Yep.
And 4 years later, Dan Campbell has built a monster truck.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was the worst job.
Yep. And supposedly the worst hire.
And Sirianni goes to kind of a VIP lounge of coaching spots.
Yep.
I mean, they've fired Super Bowl winning coaches, and it last year it's a tire fire.
Right.
And this year he had to have his wrist slapped for yelling at fans. I like so much about Philadelphia. He doesn't feel like he's got the gravitas to be the Eagles.
And then you replace the coordinators, and that to me is always a bad sign when they're bringing in coordinators who don't have background with you. Vic Fangio is a really good defensive coordinator. You don't need me to tell you that. Kellen Moore accomplished a lot as an OC in Dallas, but neither of those guys had connections to Nick Sirianni.
So somebody told him.
So he walked the plank last year. They thought about firing him. I think if they had fired him, they would have brought in a Belichick or a Vrabel. They don't do it. They replace both his coordinators. They bring in guys from the outside who he doesn't have background with. It just, if it doesn't go right, then who's left, right? Who's left to pay for it? So, and they're so invested. That's the other thing you got to remember. That roster, if you look at it, it's an incredibly talented roster, right? But it's set up in a way where in 2 or 3 years, there's a huge bill coming, and they're very leveraged to win right now. And that's why I think the Vrabels and the Belichicks make sense for them, because they need a guy, if they're going to move off of Sirianni,
can't be learning on the job,
who comes in right away and makes a difference right away and can win right away. Because that group of players, the way the contract's set up and everything else, that team is built to win over the next 2 or 3 years, and then they're going to have to retool everything. So I think Philly's a really interesting one. There's a lot of pressure on Nick, and again, was that a sign of the pressure? Was that a sign of the pressure being on him of coaching in Philadelphia?
Yeah, that's a big job.
Yeah.
I would argue could be the simultaneously top 3 best job and the hardest.
Yeah.
I mean, sports talk radio is massively influential in Philly.
Well, think about this. Think about the coaches who've gone through there, right? So Andy Reid gets fired. I think it was time when he got fired.
Yeah.
Chip Kelly, 10 wins, 5 wins, fired.
Ow.
Right? Doug Peterson wins their first Super Bowl, fired 3 years later. Nick Sirianni wins the Super Bowl in 22. At the end of 23, he almost got fired, and he's in the hot seat in 24. There's no other. The NFC East is like the SEC. The NFC, if you think about the pressure that's on guys in that division,
some of it's influenced by the intense media and fan relentless criticism.
I mean, Dallas, Mike McCarthy won 12 games 3 years in a row. If Mike McCarthy wins 12 games 3 years in a row in Jacksonville, they're building a statue of him. in Dallas, it's not good enough. And so, there's definitely a more intense pressure. We're talking about Daboll, right? The Giants, who were the model of stability in the NFL. Ben McAdoo gets 2 years. Pat Shurmur gets 2 years. Joe Judge gets 2 years. Brian Daboll's in year 3 now. So it's a more intense environment in that division. And the Eagles' job is it takes a certain type of person to win in Philly.
Okay, we're out in 2.5 minutes. Brock Purdy, so wonky against Kansas City.
Yeah.
Last 12 games, 6-6. Passer rating 80. Mm-hmm. Have they made a decision on his future?
They plan to pay him. And I think what you have to look at again is sort of, and this is the great thing about where they're at right now. You wouldn't ask for Brandon Ayuk to get hurt, Deebo Samuel to get hurt, Trent Williams to hold out, all that stuff. But it's giving you a very real view of what it could look like in 2 or 3 years, because this core of players is going to age out.
Right.
And so does Brock Purdy grow into it over the course of this year where there are guys moving in and out of the lineup where you do need a little bit more from him. And I think we have seen signs of what sort of quarterback he can be. Again, I think if Brock Purdy weren't a 7th-round pick, I think we would be looking at him completely different now. I don't think a lot of the questions that are being asked of Brock Purdy would be asked about him if he was the 5th pick in the draft. I think they're asked about him because of where he was drafted, and people can't let go of that and look at him as being very limited physically. I think he can play, and they think he can play, and they plan to pay him now, again, subject to the rest of the year, because we're going to get a very clear look at what it looks like when he has a little bit less around.
Did you hear J-Mac? Mm-hmm. Yeah, J-Mac, if he was drafted as the number 5 pick, he'd be 6'4" and move faster.
He is the biggest Brock Purdy hater in sports.
I'm not. I just think I almost.
This is going to sound weird. Look at his legs. I'm serious. Like, look at his legs. This guy is seen as being physically limited, right?
Right.
Better athlete than you think, more powerful than you think. Look at his legs. Like, he is sort of built like Russell Wilson. Like, when he was really rolling in Seattle, what everybody would say about him is he's short. He's not small, right? If you look at Brock Purdy's build, he's not as small a person as you think. I actually think that I think internally the decision's been made to extend him.
Okay, that's what we're looking for.
Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.